expand.
With the transition from Season 1 to Season 2, the show is given a higher resolution, and, more obviously, it now plays in widescreen. The show also looks very slightly desaturated now, but I'm half sure I'm just imagining this. And since this is the closest thing to an art style change we're ever going to get, I figured this was as good a time as any to discuss that art style. It's not that great, but still pretty good. At least better than I might have implied in a previous video. My favorite part of the art style is the character designs. WordGirl herself is simple but memorable, and most of the villains do a good job incorporating their themes while having exaggerated details when necessary. This is most obvious in characters like the Butcher or Chuck being much larger than ordinary civilians. But the actual way these characters are drawn feels rather dull sometimes. There's a lot of flat colors and basic shapes, and the show uses shadows very rarely. If it weren't for the character designs, the show might end up having a very boring visual design as a result. The animation can also look a bit stiff and repetitive sometimes, but there's just as many moments where characters pull exaggerated runs or faces, so it's not that big of an issue. The more episodes I watch, the more I notice the lineless are used for the backgrounds, which I honestly find more visually appealing. Early on, I thought that it would have been preferable to have an art style similar to the Kaboom comics, and yes, there's official WordGirl comics, we'll cover those eventually, but over time I've come to realize that the very fun and exaggerated style of the comics likely wouldn't have been feasible to do in animation. The animators would have needed way more time and effort to produce an art style like that, and it probably would have exceeded Soup to Nuts' budget and or manpower. A good compromise, in my opinion, would have been something similar to the 2017 DuckTales. That show used more distinct shapes for characters, used shadows more often, and even incorporated Benbei dots to emulate the classic Carl Barks comics. Considering that WordGirl is supposed to be a superhero homage/parody, that sort of art style seems like it would have been a perfect fit. If this still would have been impractical for Soup to Nuts resources, then fair, but I remember other PBS Kids shows like Cyber Chase or Martha Speaks and think of how much more visually interesting WordGirl could have been. In the end though, the show still looks good, just a bit underwhelming sometimes. And honestly, art style isn't nearly as big a concern for me as story, writing, characters, themes, etc. Hence why I will now spend the remaining 97% of this video discussing said elements episode by episode.
Who ran for president?
Didn't Becky run?
Oh boy, another politics episode. Everyone behave. Sally is running a campaign to get re-elected as district attorney, and her family is helping out. Becky, inspired by this, decides to run for class president at her school, but it quickly turns out that Toby is also running. He hands her a campaign pen, which allows him to eavesdrop on her practicing her speech to her family. The next day, Toby has beaten Becky to the punch by stealing her speech and campaign promises, on top of claiming WordGirl is backing him and volunteering his robots to count the votes. Hey, Becky, can you give the principal the definition of a conflict of interest? After a montage of Toby's campaign just thrashing Becky's, Becky tells Toby that WordGirl will be showing up on election day to back her instead, but Toby plots to prevent that. On election day, Becky sees on the news that robots are rampaging through town, and she's forced to go and stop them. Voting wraps up at the school while she fights, but Toby quickly realizes that his robots are no longer available to count the votes.
Perhaps I should count the votes myself?
I don't think so, Toby. There's too many. We'll be here all night.
Are you saying you would have let him count the votes if it wouldn't take so long? The principal decides to just take votes again via a show of hands in the auditorium. Becky and Toby each get only a single vote. Then, for some reason, one student suggests Violet be president, and she gets a standing ovation. Violet names Becky her vice president, effectively giving her the victory over Toby. And later that night, the Botsford celebrate Sally winning her election and Becky sort of winning hers. I'm surprised it took until season 2 to see Becky's school for the first time, but it's nice to have it as a new setting. Naturally, the antagonist is Toby, running against Becky because he wants to power trip on the authority he'll have as class president.
I'm going to impress WordGirl with my newly elected power!
Never mind, it just comes back to his crush again. Bugging Becky, and also planting a recording device on her, to steal her ideas works well as a way to scam himself to the top. I like the montage of Toby making spectacular displays to win voters, particularly the ending bit where a Toby poster knocks a Becky poster away. And his reaction to realizing he sent all his robots to fight WordGirl, inadvertently ruining his own plan.
I sent all the robots to destroy the city!
Congratulations, Toby. You played yourself. On the opposing ticket, Becky also gets some good stuff here. I like the idea of paralleling her own campaign with her mom's and showing Sally inspiring Becky to want to make things better in her school. This is a very kids show depiction of an election, even compared to Mr. Big's Big Plan, but the adult election is just background noise and the kid election can get away with being so naive. Although Becky's campaign promises do give me flashbacks to that one Peanut special.
You're absolutely right, sir. I won't do anything without consulting you, sir.
He's sold out! We elected him and he's sold out!
We also get to see the Botsfords just being really cute and encouraging together. We didn't actually get a ton of the whole family together last season, so this being in the first episode of season 2 is promising. One small detail that stuck out to me is that Becky specifically listed adding an art class as one of her campaign promises. Either she really likes art in spite of her own lack of skill, or she'd just do it for Violet's sake. Either choice is really sweet. Speaking of Violet though, the ending is the weirdest part of the episode, and her involvement is a big reason why. I'm fine with the concept of both Becky and Tobey losing to a Dark Horse victor, but it being Violet doesn't work because she had no presence in the episode before the auditorium scene. Scoops is the one Becky talks to about running for class president early on. Why not replace him with Violet and have her give some of her own ideas? Why not actually show why Violet would be appealing to the students? As it is, we're just left with no explanation why she's volunteered or why everyone goes for her. Or, if Becky's gonna end up in office anyway, why not just have her win? It's not like the position she did get is brought up again anyway as far as I can tell, it wouldn't change anything. The way this ending is mishandled really takes the wind out of the episode's sails. It was doing just fine before then, even having a surprisingly visually interesting bit with the robot fight, particularly the last one WordGirl takes down, but the resolution is confusing and frustrating when it would have been really easy to fix. Not the best start to the season.
I'm Bo Handsome, and this is...
May I have a word?
Ah, finally, we've got a new season and new game show bits.
It's just so cute the way Huggy pounces on people.
Okay.
Never mind, it's just old stuff in the new resolution.
We got the red and white onions, Milky Boys, got the La Croix, we got the soup fetus juice, we got some sliced pickle ricks.
WordGirl and the Butcher are fighting at the bank, but both have other things on their minds. WordGirl is preparing to be a guest speaker at a class, while Butcher is getting frustrated with his own struggles with vocabulary. Wait, we're actually turning this into a plot point? Interesting. Later, a man named T.H. Boucher shows up at an adult speaking class taught by... Miss Champlain? Okay. Mr. Boucher is taught how to articulate, and he takes to the concept pretty well. Later still, WordGirl practicing her speech is interrupted by the Butcher robbing an armored car, and it quickly turns out that his speech is suddenly much improved. After the Butcher escapes, he then goes to rob... Oh no, not this guy again.
Why are you stealing gold? Shouldn't you be stealing bread or something?
WordGirl catches up to the Butcher and ends up on a long ramble. When the Butcher calls her on this, he misinterprets her reaction and believes that he taught her the word ramble, joyously running off. Mr. Boucher then shows back up at the speech class, announcing that he's now fixed, with his excitement causing him to misspeak a lot. Miss Champlain then announces the class is having a guest speaker, Dr. Two-Brains. Mr. Boucher tries to hide from WordGirl, but when she complains about the Butcher correcting her, Boucher stands up and reveals that he is the Butcher! He and WordGirl fight until Huggy gets him stuck in a desk chair.
Oh, okay. Just seemed to wrap up kind of quickly.
Messing up the pacing is okay if the characters make jokes about it. So yeah, like I joked earlier, this episode takes a minor running gag and actually explores it as a serious character beat. It's interesting to see Butcher talking about how he doesn't like his tendency to misspeak and genuinely wants to fix it.
It's just, I love words, and I want to use them more rightly.
This actually allows the episode to teach kids some more about language outside of just word definitions. I like how it's able to expand its horizons while still staying on theme. Just the idea of assigning the word articulate to a Butcher episode is brilliant. While the Butcher doesn't get it perfect immediately, which actually just makes it feel more natural, he does briefly get distinctly different speech patterns and eventually expresses his happiness at being fixed. I will admit that Butcher mistakenly thinking he taught WordGirl a word is a bit hit or miss. His excitement is still endearing, but moments where characters fall into a delusion and don't listen to people correcting them, as opposed to explicitly rejecting these corrections, tend to get annoying to me. That said, it does lead into some pretty great jokes.
I have no idea what you just said, but you sound excited, so congratulations!
Everybody! You! Well, you're the only one here! I taught WordGirl a word!
Heck, speaking of the gold guy, he's actually way more entertaining than I expected with his inexplicable excitement to be robbed. But getting back to the class, it's handled really well even outside of Butcher. Miss Champlain's soft-spoken personality fits really well in the role of patient teacher to a rowdy disguised villain, and the eventual reveal of this being where WordGirl is a guest speaker is pretty obvious, but still done well, and it allows some amusing scenes of WordGirl preparing for her speech, and also getting angry when everyone accuses her of rambling like she's a pirate with a magnetic hook or something. This episode was overall mostly funny, and it's always neat to see characters get fleshed out more like Butcher here. It's a bit of a shame that Butcher's improved speech doesn't stick, but I get wanting to preserve the running gag, and even here it's made clear that improving one's speech like Butcher wants to is a long-term effort.
My favorite word is pugnacious because it sounds really funny.
That is legitimately a more difficult word than any of the main show's featured words so far. Becky and Tim are preparing for a boogie oogie oogie dance contest, but Becky isn't finding learning to dance easy. Tim reminisces about his past history with dancing, up to and including
my own instructional dance video.
Please tell me we get to watch that. Becky then hears someone calling for help and flies off to rescue a mannequin. Soon, a massive force field surrounds the city, and WordGirl learns that Dr. Two-Brains is behind this. Two-Brains taunts WordGirl by placing the shield controls right next to the barrier's edge and prepares to turn every building in the city into cheese one by one. After a montage of WordGirl failing to get through the shield and, no, not the library! Anyway, WordGirl is inspired to try dancing through the shield. It doesn't work. Tim, who happened to be nearby, runs over to offer WordGirl some instruction, and she enlists his help. Tim succeeds in using dancing to distract the henchmen and hit the controls, allowing WordGirl to easily mop up the villains and trap them inside a smaller shield.
Oh man, you think they'll forget to call the police again?
Hopefully this doesn't lead into an episode where the villains sue WordGirl or something. Later that night, Becky admits to Tim she doesn't want to dance in public and comes up with a substitute dance partner. Bob, of course. He and Tim handily win. This is the first purely goofy episode of the season, and while it does have a few slow moments, it's overall really fun. The biggest weak point would probably be the montage in the middle. Montages in this show are rather hit or miss, since most of the show's humor revolves around dialogue and character dynamics. With a montage, you're reduced to visual humor, which doesn't always work as well, and this one is an example of that. It's just WordGirl's semi-over-the-top ways to destroy the shield failing, while Two-Brains just turns buildings into cheese. Thankfully, the rest of the episode is more engaging. Becky's poor dancing skills aren't that funny in and of themselves, and Tim's reaction to them at home fall a bit flat, but it's all worth it to see everyone's reaction to her shimmying at the energy field.
Wait, what are you doing? What is she doing?
No, not the energy field, although it is scary looking. No, I was talking about your dancing.
Two-Brains and Tim both got a lot of other funny moments as well, from Two-Brains' reactions to WordGirl snarking at him.
But you're not very good at the gloating.
I don't care what you think, WordGirl. I'm at peace with my gloating skills.
To Tim's dancing skills actually being what saves the day. Tim specifically is probably the star of this episode. Not only does he disable the shield, he also gets a really nice moment with Becky at the end of the episode. He admits he does want to win, but cares more about having fun with his daughter. And when he realizes Becky is uncomfortable with being in the competition, he lets her sit it out and lets Bob sub in, which ends up being the best of both worlds. Tim's love of dancing itself just feels on brand by this point with all the random competitions and hobbies he participated in last season.
You can do anything with Fred, and it doesn't matter. You need an astronaut trope for your astronaut movie? Fred could do that. Fred likes astronauts.
I'd say this episode needs a little time to ramp up to its funniest bits, but it's worth sitting through the early stuff. The episode's only 11 minutes after all, it's not like you're wasting that much time.
I'm sorry, that is incorrect.
You might want to double check that.
I really don't need to.
Oh, so we are getting new game show bits. Well, now I just look dumb. After a brief fight against the energy monster, WordGirl races to school and realizes it's field day. She meets up with Scoops and Violet as Becky, with Toby arriving soon after.
Morning, Toby. Cause any destruction lately?
Does he arrive by robot every day? I'm just surprised more students aren't bored with this yet. Toby is not enthused to learn it's field day, but everyone is soon distracted by...
Hello, children of Woodview Elementary!
the best teacher character in the show. Mrs. Ripley introduces everyone to Field Day and reveals the prize for the top competitor, rare markers that only the teachers normally get for some reason. Was this actually a thing anywhere? What's so special about these markers? Tobey tries to get out of Field Day, but is goaded with his pride into participating. After he vanishes for a moment, he comes back looking a bit different, and somehow wins.
As expected, I am victorious, yay.
You don't have to be afraid to put your dream in action. You're never gonna fade, you'll be the main attraction.
While Becky opts to sandbag to preserve her secret identity and not exercise an unfair advantage, Tobey wins again and again over the course of another montage. The final event is a tug of war between Becky and Tobey, who are now tied.
Wow, how did Becky tie it up?
Don't you remember? Becky won the swimming race after Tobey refused to jump in the water.
Gee, I wonder why. Bob, who was previously sent to investigate, discovers Tobey has been secretly controlling a robot double of himself, and he tries to alert Becky, but accidentally causes her to lose. At the awards ceremony, WordGirl flies in to expose Tobey's cheating, but he has Robo-Tobey attack her. Wow, this is probably the closest we'll ever get to a proper WordGirl versus Tobey one-on-one. And it pretty much goes the same way as if it was the actual Tobey she was fighting. Becky is declared the real winner, and Tobey pleads for Mrs. Ripley to not tell his mom. After a vote for Becky felt the need to involve Tobey's crush when it wasn't really necessary, this episode just sticks to Tobey wants to prove he's better than everyone. It's not even about the prize, he just wants to save face after some mild embarrassment.
I have the agility of a cougar and the strength of a lion. Goodbye.
Showing him as so initially hesitant to participate could have come off as unintentionally derisive of less physically fit kids, but it's made clear the real issue here is Tobey's ego. Scoops and Violet are also shown to not do that well, but while there are jokes made involving them, it's never mocking them for their performance. On the flip side, Becky struggling with restraining herself is another neat conflict. She wants to win the markers, can do so easily, and is even goaded by the narrator a bit, but unlike Tobey, she has enough integrity to play fair.
You could use your super strength.
I'm not a cheater.
Outside of these two, the episode was just fine. I felt like there's actually a lot of potential in WordGirl fighting a 2-scale Tobey robot, but the fight is far too short, and I can't tell whether that was deliberate or not. And the episode could have been funnier, but it's not bad in that regard. The montage was alright, Scoops and Violet both get a few amusing bits, and my favorite part of the episode is Tobey at the awards ceremony.
I win because I'm better than all of you at winning.
How do you explain your sudden athletic ability?
Vitamins.
This is a much better school episode than A Vote for Becky, despite not technically being in school at all, though I do hope we get more variety among school episodes going forward. They can't just use Tobey over and over for these.
It's a WordGirl portable windshield! Sorry about that, Huggy.
Let's get this party started!
This is a slumber party.
We open on Becky asking her parents to let her host a sleepover. They agree, but TJ is annoyed at the idea. Later, Becky and Violet are talking about the sleepover before Becky runs off to catch an angry Bob, and Violet soon discovers someone overheard them. Eileen pressures Violet into revealing more about the party, and she's naturally convinced it's for her birthday. The next day, after Becky's intended guests arrive, Violet explains what happened before Eileen shows up. Violet, maybe you should have said something sooner? Eileen quickly hijacks the slumber party to make it all about her, while TJ decides to try and prank the guests. Desperate to take back some control of her party, Becky blurts out that WordGirl will be showing up, causing TJ to reveal himself, and Eileen to finally go big, grabbing all the guests before stomping away.
Everything okay down there? Yep. Just, watching a monster movie.
This house must have the most powerful sound system in the world if they fell for that. Also, I gotta ask, where exactly is Eileen going? Is she just like stomping around at random, or is she taking everyone to her house or something? WordGirl uses the power of a giant sleeping bag to save the day, night, and agrees to let Eileen still stay the night for some reason. This is definitely less entertaining than the last Birthday Girl episode. The trouble with writing bratty characters is that most people find this sort of personality inherently annoying. Yeah, Eileen is intentionally written to be bratty, but intentionally annoying is still annoying. If you're not careful, a character like this can easily get more and more annoying to watch the more we see of them, and I'm worried this is already setting in for Eileen. There are a couple moments where she manages to be funnier than her interactions with Bob last time.
The Muffin Man! The Muffin Man!
Eileen, I think he already said that's not it.
The Muffin Man!
but the bulk of her screen time is just hammering in how irritating she is both to the characters and the viewers. It doesn't help that Eileen's debut also took time to flesh out Violet and have her interact with WordGirl a lot, which isn't really a thing here. Violet is present, but all she does is be scared of and or annoyed with Eileen. TJ also fails to elevate the episode. He does provide a reprieve from Eileen's shenanigans, but his annoying little brotherness isn't that much better, and none of his jokes land that well, aside from him bungeeing in the background. Though I will admit, I like the bit where he gets to give a definition himself via role-playing with his WordGirl doll. It shows that he really does learn things from her. This moment was cuter than TJ thinks WordGirl is. Not even the final fight impresses. I like the irony in wrapping Eileen up in a giant sleeping bag, and the scene of WordGirl getting it has some really good timing.
I'm sorry, but that's the biggest sleeping bag we've got. For people, that is. We also have sleeping bags for whales.
But it's not enough to make up for how short and kinda dull it is. It's a less dynamic version of her previous rampage. Honestly, I think it says a lot that my favorite parts of the episode come from the exact same character as my least favorite parts of the episode.
You love WordGirl and she's a girl.
No, she's not. She's well, it's different.
This scene reads very differently given what we'd later be told about TJ's apparent romantic preferences. Beatrice Bigsby, who's having lunch in City Hall, don't ask me why, gets cut in front of and interrupted by various people, including the mayor. Upon reaching the end of her rope, she Lady Redundant Womanifies herself and sends out an army of duplicates to inflict a plague of rudeness upon the city. The mayor wonders how WordGirl could learn about the legion of identical women messing with everyone everywhere, but a lone hero steps up to do the deed.
I'll take this one.
Later, Becky and Bob's roller skating practice is interrupted by Duplicate's annoying exposition guy, and thus starts the superhero's mission to save the city from mild irritation, I guess. Eventually, WordGirl runs into Tim, who talks about getting Becky's favorite unicorn figurine repaired. Guess what happens next?
Come on, Huggy. Let's finish this.
Something Doom music. WordGirl finally arrives at City Hall. She couldn't just go straight there because it was vital she clean up all the dupe's litter or something, but gets trapped in a cage. After the grocery store cage last season, I almost want to think the city has a law requiring one falling cage in every building. WordGirl learns why LDR is doing this, that she wants everyone else to share her pain of experiencing rudeness, and explains that everyone already knows what that's like. After the rude people apologize and the mayor frees WordGirl, she deletes her dupes and lets herself be arrested. Tim then shows up and gives WordGirl a new unicorn, but... yeah, Huggy actually gets killed off in this episode. If you remember any Huggy appearances after this, that's probably just a fanfic 7-year-old you wrote out of grief. This is a premise that can only really work in a show with a tone like this, but it works really well here. Lady Redundant Woman is a really good fit for this episode. She feels like the sort of character who would do stuff like this after swearing revenge on her manager out of envy. Beatrice deciding to be rude to everyone in the city leads to some pretty funny moments, and also sets up a decent lesson for kids. It's okay to be upset about people being rude to you, but that doesn't make it okay to be rude back, and especially not to be rude to completely unrelated people.
A jar of pennies? That is impolite, baby.
Okay, that guy might deserve it. I don't trust anyone who calls a complete stranger baby to their face. Although the episode also treats her with sympathy, showing the inciting incidents at the cafeteria. Do city halls have cafeterias? From her perspective and underlining how she feels. The way she's shown stewing to herself in a manner reminiscent of the first LDR episode, though not as well done, the Lyle just makes her sound slightly peeved instead of building to a boiling point, also feels like an attempt to impart a more subtle lesson about the merits of speaking up before things go too far instead of bottling everything up. Another small thing I like is how this episode does a surprisingly good job at showing the city being overrun. The dupes show up everywhere, and it really gives a sense that you just can't escape Lady Redundant Woman and her rudeness. It's a better version of when Mr. Big took over the city in Band on the Run. It also, oddly enough, shows WordGirl really being pushed after a dupe breaks her unicorn. As I joked earlier, the framing and Dana Furman's voice acting do really well at selling the moments, but it was ultimately just a joke. It was brushed aside pretty quickly at the climax, and when Huggy's skating running gag finally amounts to something, with him breaking it, it's very obviously played as a joke. Though we do also get to see WordGirl being blissfully happy when she sees the unicorn repaired, which is just adorable. This is another case of a good episode being paired with a bad episode and really holding it up. The pair as a whole is pretty watchable, and as a kid, I'd have been fine watching Slumber Party Pooper to get to this one.
In case you forgot, Beatrice Bixby is also...
Yeah, we know, narrator.
Lady Redundant
We know.
Which is why she tends to...
We know.
Different words.
Dad, can you please put something else on? That ad is driving me crazy.
The newest Pretty Princess episode is interrupted by a commercial for a misspeaking and overly verbose WordGirl doll, which it turns out TJ already owns. As the doll asks for various accessories, Becky learns it's manufactured by Mr. Big Enterprise. Okay, it was Mr. Big Industries, Incorporated, and now Enterprises. Make up your mind, Big. WordGirl herself shows up in Mr. Big's office to question him on the dolls, but he insists there's no funny business. WordGirl herself is so popular that he doesn't even need mind control to sell a ton of dolls. Mr. Big's actual plan, however, is to use mind control to make people buy tons of accessories for the doll. After an oddly unnerving montage with a black background, Mr. Big reveals what he plans to do with the money.
This mind control doll is making me so rich I'll buy City Hall and then I'll fight it. I can do both.
Still better than whatever Elon Musk is doing. Back at the Botsfords, Becky tries to convince her family to stop buying WordGirl branded things, but soon realizes the reason a 5th grader has to be the voice of reason, with a really good moment of her family's eager acquiescence to the doll giving way to the recurring mind control droning. WordGirl and Huggy go back to Mr. Big's office and confront Leslie. After she points out they should have seen this turn of events coming.
Of course, it's spelled out in our company's mission statement. Here.
We strive to constantly use mind control.
She does this. Leslie and Huggy have a one-on-one fight that ends with Leslie getting stuck in a pile of money, and WordGirl has the idea of using the doll's mind control to make everyone demand refunds. Mr. Big is cornered by an angry mob and reluctantly agrees to give everyone's money back in return for WordGirl saving him. Everyone throws out their merchandise. Except for TJ, of course. This is my favorite Mr. Big episode yet. Him taking advantage of WordGirl's popularity is a really clever move, and he does a pretty good job hiding his true intentions with the whole WordGirl's so popular she'd be a big cash cow anyway thing. He even agrees to make fixes to the dolls based on WordGirl's complaints. Although when I say he was hiding his intentions, that's only true in-universe. The episode actually tells us what his real plan is before WordGirl shows up, which I think is a missed opportunity for a fun, dramatic reveal of the truth just after she leaves. The whole buying City Hall thing is nonsensical, but I like that they gave him a more specific motivation than just wanting a lot of money, even if it just boils down to doing something just to prove he can. And because Mr. Big is just a magnet for societal commentary, here we get some criticism of spending too much on random things you don't need and aren't worth it.
Buy me the WordGirl remote control pickle jar.
First thing in the morning.
You're not acting like yourselves. You're constantly spending money on frivolous, silly things just because the doll tells you to.
The centering on toys is especially important for kid viewers who may themselves want as many toys and as much merchandise as they can get. WordGirl herself gets some moments that stick out too, from...
But I'll be watching you constantly. Constantly.
To her going bad cop to convince Mr. Big to refund everyone. As implied last time, WordGirl isn't above Batman tactics when the moment calls for it. But the real star this time is Leslie. She's fully transitioned from eager assistant to overworked secretary, and her monotone delivery contrasts pretty well with some of the things she says.
Since you have so much money, can I get a raise?
No.
That doesn't seem fair considering all I do.
And then there's her proving herself a strong threat in her own right when she reveals herself as a karate master and has a really cool one-on-one fight with Huggy. I like how she pretty clearly has the upper hand despite Huggy putting up a good fight himself until he tricks her to getting stuck in the money piles. This is a really fun episode, and I honestly think it could serve as a good introductory or summary episode for Mr. Big, showing off everything noteworthy about him, including the Leslie stuff that'll crop up more later, while also being very entertaining in its own right.
Fell for my lies, WordGirl!
Ever realize how many moments there are where WordGirl's superhearing should logically cause the episode to end early?
What did you do with the Fountain of Youth?
Oh, what is it with kids figuring me out today?
Today is Bring Your Daughter and Her Pet Monkey to Work Day at the county courthouse.
Sure. Becky watches Sally go up against Granny May in court. After a police officer acts more useful than every other cop in the show by cutting a knitting attack short, Granny May is sentenced to 6 to 12 months of house arrest. If this sort of sentence is standard, I think that explains a lot about the city's criminal population. Granny May is equipped with a tracking bracelet as she dropped off at her mother's house. While Sally is congratulated for a job well done by the mayor, Granny May learns from Great Granny May that the Fountain of Youth has been found at the mall. Just sitting there, apparently. Great Granny May leaves to see it, and Granny May soon follows her after easily removing her tracking bracelet. At the mall, Becky sees someone tied up in yarn and flies off to intercept Granny May. Granny herself and her mother find the fountain, but it turns out to just be spewing makeup as part of an ad campaign. WordGirl shows up, meets Great Granny May, and fights Granny May. Maybe I should rethink how I handle these names. Though it's actually Sally who stops Granny May by accidentally knocking her into the fountain and causing her to get stuck while the makeup hardens. Well, I like you hope the premise of old woman acts like a bratty kid after reuniting with her mom, because that's pretty much all of this episode. Well, that's not quite fair. To parallel Gwendolyn Edna May's relationship with her mom, yes, we learn her real name in this episode, we get more focus on Sally than I'm pretty sure we've ever seen previously. I like the contrast between her as a doting mother and her as a no-nonsense, borderline vicious district attorney. Her delivery when she's presenting evidence to Granny May is both intimidating and so over the top it's funny.
The very same hairpins that you're wearing right now!
And despite Sally routinely getting suckered in by villain plans, even by Granny herself in the Spritzer episode, it's cool to see her not buy Granny May's act for a second. Given that a single police officer is able to preemptively stop Granny from escaping, maybe courthouses just have a magical competence-boosting effect. I sure hope this never backfires on WordGirl. Sally's interactions with Becky don't do as much though, just establishing that they love each other. Never could have guessed that. But of course, Sally isn't the point of the episode. That would be, Grethel Granger May, I think would fit. Great Granny May in practice does feel a bit like a rehash of Chuck's mom, but getting to appear on screen and participate in the story more helps a lot. Imagine if one of Chuck's crimes interrupted his mom on an errand. She does still feel a bit one-note, a sweet old woman who babies her kid, but her interactions with WordGirl were really cute.
You're just as cute as a June bug you are.
Mama, stop doting on WordGirl.
I especially enjoy how things like Gigi May being hard of hearing force Granny May to legitimately experience things she fakes for others. Speaking of Granny May, she feels similarly one note here, but the fact that she's an old woman acting like a young girl around her mom is clever enough for it to not get boring over the episode, especially at the end when her committing a crime gets factored in.
Well, you're gonna go around and give it all back this instant.
But I don't want to give it back.
I'm not a fan of the Fountain of Youth bit though. It's fine in theory, albeit predictable, but doesn't really land the punchline. Maybe it's the store employee's voice. Made for a fun fight in the makeup store though. While this episode doesn't have many jokes, the good ones are still really good. Great Granny May is the sort of character you'd like to see more of, but still works well as a one-off. And the trial scene has a pretty cool, unique feel that makes the episode feel more vibrant and varied.
I'd be young and quick again. Not even WordGirl could stop me.
It's a new kind of arrogance to say, I could outrun the superhero with super speed if only I was young.
Anybody else want to go on the merry-go-round? Merry-go! Die.
Becky and Bob are in a really long line for the coaster, actual name, but soon learn the Whammer is also at the park. Good news, Whammer isn't committing any crimes, just trying to enjoy the park like anyone else. Bad news, while Bob saves her place, Becky continually leaves to rein the Whammer in. Despite her efforts, Whammer keeps on being rowdy, which chips away more and more at Becky's patience. Eventually, she's forced to completely lose her place in line to stop the Whammer from wrecking everything, which kicks off a proper fight. WordGirl eventually hits upon the idea of using chocolate-covered hot dogs, just go with it, to lure Whammer into a spinny room. I've pretty much never gone to theme parks. Whammer is incapacitated via dizziness, and Becky does eventually get her ride. Why is this image so uncanny? Wait, does Becky not have ears? Is this a Lexiconian thing? This episode is another instance of Becky struggling to balance her desires with her duties as WordGirl, but this time taken to a new level with her really just losing it a bit. The constant ramp up and Becky's bubbling emotions are really well done. It's best epitomized by her initially apologizing that she forgot to get Bob lemonade, but after the 1-2 punch of another Whammer incident and the line almost being over for her,
Are you alright?
you feel for her frustration, but you're also happy when she faces up to her responsibilities and sacrifices her spot to stop Whammer for good. Though her getting a ride immediately after winning hurts this a bit in my opinion. Yeah, she presumably had to wait in another really long line, and it is nice catharsis to see her get what she wanted, but it's how quickly it cuts to her on the coaster that makes it feel too quick to me, like the line wasn't actually that big a deal. But why get bogged down in stuff like that when we got the Whammer running around?
Excuse me. Whammer would like to know if you're a really big hot dog or a guy in a hot dog suit.
Unlike most other episodes, the villain here isn't committing a crime, he's just overly excited to be at a theme park, which doesn't pair well with the ability to make sonic blasts. He doesn't mean to break anything, or anyone, but his rowdiness is still causing problems for employees and other parkgoers. Though admittedly, I have a little less patience for the guy who refused to make chocolate-covered hot dogs. I don't care if you think it's disgusting, you don't have to eat it, so heck, Whammer is actually really agreeable with WordGirl up until the final fight. He just doesn't have a low power mode at all, apparently. And he still manages to be as funny as ever. Not all the episode's other jokes are that funny, but the ones that are work really well.
Wait time from this point. If I told you, you'd cry. Huh. Well, that's not really helpful.
This is the first episode in a while where WordGirl herself gets significantly more focused than the villain, which is a breath of fresh air. It teaches an important lesson about the value of patience and responsibility through that lens and stays entertaining all along the way. They maybe could have done a little more with the theme park setting, but it's better than previous one-off locations. We get to see Whammer throwing a Ferris wheel, so that's something.
That was the best ride ever.
If you're the kind of person who likes being thrown through the sky, why did you choose to ride the Ferris wheel?
No, not tiny.
Chuck is once more psyching himself up, preparing to prove he's the greatest and evilest sandwich maker in the world. And no, I'm not going to say Subway has him beat. The evil ones are the executives, they don't count as sandwich makers. His target ends up being a sandwich shop whose sandwiches Chuck sees as subpar and too small, but he's of course beaten by WordGirl. The shop owner, Reuben Grinder, has an idea though.
Well, I found myself staring at that gorgeous face of yours.
Chuck is hired as a spokesperson, with WordGirl providing oversight. Against all odds, the job goes well, and Chuck actually becomes extremely famous and beloved over the course of yet another montage.
Of all the sandwich spokesmen, you're the dreamiest!
Oops. Sorry, Sammy Sub.
I'm not sure if I have more or less questions about the sandwich head thing now, but when Chuck's finally given the chance to make sandwiches, he's infuriated at having to make the tiny ones he hates and quits. Chuck proceeds to interrupt a Fancy People's Awards dinner where Reuben is catering and WordGirl is receiving an award, revealing he installed giant bread to turn the guests into a giant sandwich. WordGirl saves the Fancy People and laments the failed attempt to turn Chuck away from crime. This is basically Toby Goes Good if the villain's turn to good wasn't a creepy trick. The chance encounter gives Chuck a chance at an honest job, but he gives it all up because tiny sandwiches are disgusting for some reason. I love how WordGirl actively pressures Chuck to stay on the job. Him staying off the streets helps her just as much as him, and she's not going to give up this opportunity so easily.
It's still better than being in jail, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it?
At the same time though, she does earnestly want to keep Chuck clean for his own sake as well, and is openly saddened instead of victorious at the end of the episode.
I really thought I'd helped you find the path to the straight and narrow.
You can't change me, WordGirl.
But before then, the job itself is a neat storytelling device. It's nice to see a villain not plotting evil for most of the episode, and WordGirl watching and helping Chuck lends it a unique edge. The fact that Chuck becomes legitimately successful and attains the fame he often says he's seeking is gratifying, but also amplifies the tragedy when he loses all of it because of his stubbornness. Wait, is this episode just a better version of Chuck the Nice Pencil Selling Guy? I'll say one thing, Reuben Grinder is definitely more enjoyable than Mr. Callahan from that episode. He's actually a really nice and accommodating boss, though not without his vices. He does seem to look down on Chuck's sandwich making skills a bit, but is willing to ask for Chuck's help when running late for the catering gig. And even if Chuck's hatred of the finger sandwiches was reasonable and rational, it's clear Reuben is only requiring them be made this way because of the tastes of the Fancy People. Oh, and speaking of the Fancy People, guess who's back?
For the love of all things fancy, the upper crust is going to crush the upper crust.
Okay, the Fancy People aren't really that important, but I love how absurd Chuck's plan of turning them into a giant sandwich is, as well as his apologizing for embarrassing WordGirl by crashing the party. I'm not sure if this is my favorite Chuck episode thus far, but it is a really fun one. There's a bit of emotion between Chuck and WordGirl, but the episode more so focuses on the humor of turning a dangerous, or so he presents himself, villain into a popular spokesperson.
But no butts, and no crusts either.
No crusts?
Keep Chuck's dislike of crustless sandwiches in mind, it'll be kind of a thing later.
Shall be coming round the mountain when coach.
For nearly 2 decades, I've had no idea what Havarti is. Turns out it's just a kind of cheese. The Botsfords are on a long drive to a water park, and Becky is annoyed with her family's singing. Dr. Two-Brains, meanwhile, is trying to create a combination of 3 different cheeses, but is convinced by his henchmen to take a break and go on a fishing vacation. Two-Brains has a similarly miserable voyage until hitting a rest stop that the Botsfords happen to also be at.
A blimp! Ha! And they said I was crazy to cater to non-rigid airships. Well, who's laughing now?
In a world with so little sense to go around, sometimes rationing your sanity is smartest in the long run. Two-Brains sees a commercial for a cheese exhibition that famous cheese expert David Driscoll will be attending. Plotting to kidnap Driscoll for helping creating his combo cheese, he diverts his trip to the exhibition, and Becky convinces her family to... Oh no, Tim wants to go anyway.
Dad, can we please pick it up a bit?
Oh no, Tim is just me when I'm driving. Two-Brains captures Driscoll, but WordGirl intercepts and defeats him. Partially because the henchmen are upset Two-Brains tried to change their vacation plans. Everyone but Two-Brains finally gets to have their fun vacation, including Chuck, who's just been popping up in the background for some reason. Okay, while I would have preferred an episode about Chuck hitchhiking with the Botsfords and getting up to shenanigans, this was still a pretty funny episode. The bulk of the humor comes from Dr. Two-Brains. He's more annoyed and snarky than usual, which overlaps with his usual mania surprisingly well.
What am I supposed to do? Put 3 separate pieces of cheese on my sandwich like some sort of Cro-Magnon Neanderthal?
He's the only one who doesn't seem to see the value in a vacation. Even Becky, while she's annoyed with her family's activities during the trip, is eager to get to the water park. Heck, if it weren't for Two-Brains derailing his and the henchman's vacation plans to kidnap a cheese master, he wouldn't have gotten arrested at all. Also, he's hilariously easy to beat if he doesn't have the henchmen or any inventions to provide support. He's just fed up with everyone around him, from the henchman to WordGirl, with the exception of David Driscoll, who he actually ends up fanboying over.
Could you put to my good friend Dr. Two-Brains?
Your plan to force me to work around the clock isn't exactly putting you at the top of my buddy list.
Becky being fed up with her own party isn't as funny since she's not as over the top, but still works pretty well. She ends up sympathizing with Two-Brains' own frustrations and is pretty entertaining at the height of her frustration. But the cheese exhibition is probably the most consistently funny portion of the episode, despite how short it is. There are funnier jokes elsewhere, but here we get a string of good moments like Driscoll's reaction to be kidnapped, or Becky being forced to wait at an in-use phone booth. Maybe this episode could have done goofier stuff with the long, annoying trip premise, but Two-Brains really manages to carry it. It's easy to see why he became the show's de facto top villain. I feel like the writers tend to have the most fun with him.
Alright, Huggy, take her down! On second thought, don't rush.
Hey guys, I found something that'll get us to the water park faster.
You guys are too much.
Sign my tax forms! Sign my toes!
Mr. Big, upset that his commercials are getting preempted by yet another award ceremony for WordGirl, decides that WordGirl gets too much attention. As such, he creates a new pop star to steal her thunder. Said pop star, Tiny Big, becomes colossally famous within 24 hours, and pretty soon no one cares about WordGirl. Mr. Big converses with Leslie about their success, in the process revealing that Tiny Big being modeled after himself wasn't entirely ego. Turns out, Mr. Big was a music star himself once.
I wanna date your money. I wanna date your money.
This information is completely useless, but I refuse to let any of you not know it. Mr. Big then hits upon the idea of using Tiny Big to make a huge amount of money, which he somehow never thought of earlier. Tiny Big's fame and success continue until WordGirl tries to interrupt one of his concerts. She fails to turn the crowd against him, but because she's not thrown up for some reason, she finds a giant tape recorder. No points for guessing what happens next. Tiny Big and Mr. Big are both run off the premises, and WordGirl finally receives the key to the city she should have gotten at the start. Though it's apparently her 41st, so I'm not sure if she even needs it at this point. This episode hits pretty much all the beats you'd expect from the premise. Pop star stealing the limelight, rabid fans, protagonist struggling with jealousy and uncovering a conspiracy, pop star turns out to be faking their talent. This isn't the last episode this season involving the populace turning against WordGirl to some degree, and it may not even be the worst, but it is a pretty weak example. It works for exemplifying the words fad and limelight, but as a story, it's rather dull. There's nothing interesting or entertaining about Tiny Big himself. Mr. Big is the guy pulling the strings, and it's not even clear how much agency the guy they picked out has in this situation. This could have actually been a neat twist, if Tiny Big actually came to hate his fame and helped WordGirl shut down his own career, but in practice he's just a random guy who everyone falls in love with because everyone falls in love with pop singers. This is one example where if the standard Mr. Big social commentary was intentional, I think it works to the episode's detriment. The episode reeks of the writers being annoyed with contemporary pop music and working it out without being creative about it. There's also some weirdness with the cash cow part. A few lines of dialogue seem to imply WordGirl believes people are being mind controlled to buy Tiny Big stuff, which would make sense given almost every Mr. Big episode up to now, but this isn't actually the case and the concept just kinda gets dropped. It almost feels like mind control was part of the script but got cut and not everything was fixed to accommodate that.
I am not controlling their mind.
And why is the entire town practically hypnotized by Tiny Big?
Maybe I'm just overthinking things, but it's not like the episode makes it easy to assume the best. Outside of learning about Mr. Big's dark past, there's very little that's genuinely entertaining. We really just get exposition guy and one funny Becky moment.
And why is everything so expensive? Don't touch that.
This episode isn't one I remember disliking as a kid, but it's now one of my least favorites. It's a shame, there's a lot they could have done here.
People are always going to need her to keep the world safe. I mean, anyone can sing or dance.
Oh no.
Look into my eyes, you'll be hypnotized.
Let's move on, shall we?
You'll be hypnotized. Ouch!
I think I'm a clone now.
I mean, what else was I gonna use? Beatrice resumes her job at the copy shop.
Who doesn't deserve second chances, or even third chances, right?
So first there was her debut, then the time frame of her second episode wouldn't give her enough time to get her job back, and the rudeness episode showed her on lunch break, so that'd be her second chance. Yeah, math checks out. After being annoyed by a WordGirl fan who should not be using that tone of voice,
Hi there. I absolutely love WordGirl.
Beatrice eats a picture of WordGirl to create an evil, redundant-speaking clone. I always love when stories pull something absolutely ridiculous that somehow makes complete sense as a natural extension of the nonsense we've already seen. Evil, malicious WordGirl sets about stealing every thesaurus in the city, causing everyone to turn against the real WordGirl. Eventually, Becky comes up with a plan. She intercepts the clone, while Huggy infiltrates a copy shop. WordGirl battles evil, malicious WordGirl and kills her with sprinklers, exposing the truth, before going to confront Lady Redundant Woman herself. LDR attempts to create an evil Huggy to fight WordGirl, but fails because the real Huggy already stole the ink cartridge in her neck, leaving her powerless and easily arrested. Compared to Tiny Big, this is a marked improvement on the people don't like WordGirl anymore concept. A fake WordGirl running around stealing things? Still not that original, but way more entertaining and believable. While there are a few moments that come off as a little weird,
I think the only thing we can do now is stop liking WordGirl.
the city's new mistrust of WordGirl feels more organic and understandable, though it does feel a bit odd that she's never accosted by the police for any of this. Evil, malicious WordGirl herself is a riot. The modulation on her voice sounds really nice and makes her feel more evil, and her redundant speak paired with her over-the-top voice acting works really well. Maybe my favorite part of the episode is when she tries to retort against the real WordGirl and ends up reading from the inexplicably enormous thesaurus she's trying to steal.
Aggravating, exasperating, frustrating, needling, and no wonder everyone turned on me.
She's honestly more entertaining than Lady Redundant Woman herself, who's more busy reading the stolen thesauruses and fawning over her copy machine than doing things. Though I would like to point out the irony of her being forced to listen to everyone cheering WordGirl as she's arrested, since this is exactly what kicked the episode off. There aren't any other characters that stick out aside from maybe TJ, who goes on a mini sadness arc. Unlike Down with Word Up, he sees WordGirl commit a crime with his own eyes, so it's way more difficult to assume it's fake. But there's still a lot of funny moments, my favorites being WordGirl at the mirror, the clock for the sprinklers running fast, and what happens when the sprinklers go off.
Hey, wait! No.
Maybe my favorite bit of voice acting in the entire show, if I'm being honest. So aside from a few small cameos like Miss Libri, the adult speaking class, and Toby, that's really all there is to talk about. The evil clone premise may be done to death, but WordGirl pulls it off pretty well.
Hey, it looks like you'll need a fourth chance, huh, Beatrice? Hey, when you get out, come and see me.
Dave is exactly the kind of boss that every employee wants, but no one actually needs.
Shiny teeth in me.
Sally watches a new game show hosted by one Seymour Orlando Smooth, filling out a sheet with answers to his questions. Becky, suspicious, tags along with Sally, dropping the sheet to the TV station to receive her prizes. WordGirl and Huggy soon overhear Seymour talking about his plan, using disappearing and reappearing ink to trick contestants into making written statements that Seymour is allowed to withdraw all their money from their bank accounts. That sentence actually made the plan sound way more sensible than it actually was. The heroes pop out to confront Seymour, but he uses game show themed items to get them trapped inside his prize wheel. Sally then shows up, having desperately wanted to spin the wheel the whole time, and Seymour eagerly lets her. Sally, I don't think you know what spin means. Seymour has Sally spin the wheel again, but the delay gives WordGirl and Huggy enough time to escape. When Sally learns the truth about the game show, she helps WordGirl and Huggy take down Seymour using a hand mirror and a shower cap. So has anyone watched the May I Have a Word segments and thought, that's cool, but what if Bo Handsome was a villain? Seymour Orlando Smooth is another villain whose appeal is all in the personality. He's an energetic and charismatic, but still hateable, performer who constantly speaks in a game show host voice and wields stuff like shiny teeth and hair gel to fight. Even if his plan here is somewhat nonsensical, it's hard not to have fun watching him prance around and seeing WordGirl humiliate him in the end.
You've escaped! Yep, a couple of minutes ago. We just wanted to see you dance around like a goofball before we took you down.
Though there's something familiar about his voice.
No, not the finish. No. Anything but the finish!
Why didn't Transformers Prime get a game show episode? But Seymour isn't the only focused character here. We also get some more on Sally. Weirdly though, she feels more like Tim in this episode. She's louder, less sensible, and more gullible than usual, laser focusing on the chance to win useless prizes and spin a massive wheel. Which, fair, giant game show wheels are really fun, but remember 6 episodes ago when Sally was mercilessly tearing apart a criminal's legal defense? Now we have this.
Fine, the kitties are yours.
That's not to say Sally isn't funny here. Heck, a part of me thinks using her adds an element of contrast that makes it funnier than if it was just Tim. And Becky / WordGirl also gets to play off her a bit.
He tricked you, Mom. Mamma mia, what a trick!
One of her better cover-ups, sad to say. I get the sense that someone on the staff really wanted to show more Sally this season because they were building to something or other, I don't know. But the star of the show is a host, and he gets a really good debut. I wouldn't blame you if you found this sort of character obnoxious, but I had a lot of fun watching this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how he escalates later on.
It was the world's biggest bottle of bubbles.
That's great, because I'm allergic to bubbles.
Bingo.
WordGirl beats a team up of all their food-based villains, plus Amazing Rope Guy for some reason, and takes in the love of the public. Later, Becky learns from Scoops that Granny May has been released from jail for good behavior, why do I feel like this happens a lot in the city? And has become an undefeated bingo champion. Somehow, winning a completely luck-based game has made her a beloved celebrity. Becky / WordGirl investigates Granny May as her popularity grows, eventually discovering that Granny is using a metallic duck to manipulate the bingo balls and pull up the number she wants because I guess magnetism can hone in on specific targets like that.
I am Magneto, master of magnet.
WordGirl attempts to expose Granny May, but no one wants to hear it. She then decides to compete against Granny May at a charity bingo game.
What charity will you be playing for?
Oh, the Save the Dinosaurs Foundation.
Oh, you're gonna repair those time-traveling train tunnels and finally let them cross into the present? Thanks to Tim providing wooden bingo balls, Granny's cheating fails and WordGirl wins, but everyone still loves Granny and now hates WordGirl. Afterwards, though, Scoops learns about the duck and writes an article exposing the truth, returning everything to normal. Before we get to the main plot, a weird tangent.
Choosing the right wood is important when building a ship.
So hungry.
A good pirate looks for oak, mahogany, spruce.
No, too early and you already got a reference. Remember how the show's second episode had Scoops talk about wanting to write for a big mainstream paper? Well, he does that in this episode. Twice. Dude fulfilled his dream and it's brushed off like he's still just grinding at the Daily Rag. Anyway, this is yet another episode involving the city's citizens turning against WordGirl to some degree, and sadly, it's closer to Tiny Big than I Think I'm a Clone Now. In some ways it's worse than Tiny Big, in others it's better. On the plus side, I'd say it is the funnier of the two. It happens to have its own equivalent to young Mr. Big as a music star, that being a Granny May rap video.
I can't reach it.
Wow, this is just the same episode again, isn't it? And I'd say I like this song slightly more. On top of that, we have the Save the Dinosaurs Foundation and the inherent comedy in dramatically playing up bingo like it's chess or, checkers. But the whole bingo thing also plays into my big problem with the episode. Granny May is apparently able to become a city hero through being undefeated at it. And when WordGirl tries to accuse the known criminal of cheating at the game she's never lost at, everyone treats her as a pariah and acts like Granny's winning streak ending is some great tragedy. I usually give the show a lot of leeway with the logical or stupid things, but I think I've hit my limit with winning at a 100% luck-based sport over and over will make you a beloved icon and not just someone who appears in in a few fluff news stories and is quickly forgotten. Maybe if it was smaller stakes, like if Granny Mae was just scamming her way to cash prizes and she had a small but vicious band of weirdo fans, it would work better, but as it is, everything in this episode just really annoys me. The saving grace would probably be Scoops. While I don't think him writing for the Big City Times is treated with the gravitas it deserves, he gets a few funny lines, isn't completely suckered in by Granny, and is the one to successfully reveal the truth. He's not as good here as in other appearances, but his scenes are probably the most consistently well done.
There's nothing more fun than watching bingo!
Except maybe flossing.
We can't have this! You're making a mess!
Mess? You have no idea.
After Two-Brains' plot to turn some hot springs into fondue is thwarted, WordGirl is called away to a robbery at the grocery store put on by a new villain, the cool-looking Steve McClean. Later that night, Two-Brains is watching a WordGirl fan show's countdown of her top villains, but is shocked and infuriated to see he's been surpassed as #1 by Steve McClean thanks to the latter's snazziness and penchant for literal clean getaways. Over the course of the season's 5th or 6th montage, McClean's fame grows and Two-Brains is continually ignored by the police and public. When he learns that the grocery store has diverted its security from the dairy to the cleaning supplies, Two-Brains decides to beat Steve McClean in his own game.
Now, the new and improved Snazzy Dr. Coolbrains.
You can guess how well that goes. After WordGirl shrugs him off, Two-Brains decides to take out Steve McClean to prove he's the actual #1 villain. His plan to trap McClean behind a pool of fondue works out extremely well due to McClean's obsession with neatness, allowing him to be easily arrested. And because Two-Brains was completely correct earlier in the episode,
Oh, you fickle public!
he immediately reclaims his #1 villain spot. Remember how in the last video I talked about Two-Brains' ego being a deceptively major part of his character? This is the episode that was hanging in the back of my mind as I wrote that. Both in and out of universe, Dr. Two-Brains is considered WordGirl's greatest enemy, and he's very proud of that position, so losing it to a new guy is a good way to get him worked up and give us a different sort of conflict than usual. While the show tends to focus on its villains a lot, this is one of the few episodes where it feels like the villain was explicitly written to be the main character, and it's a pretty fun dynamic. Two-Brains' envy and annoyance build and build until he tries to copy Steve McClean and fails miserably, and it's all paced really well. Special mention to the rap number, which straight up reuses the music from Granny Mae's rap last episode. And these episodes are paired, so you're always gonna hear this specific song in back-to-back episodes. I love it. Also, we get to see the mouse brain wearing a nightcap and its own mustache. Squeaky just really likes feeling included, I guess. Steve McClean himself was also a really fun presence. Admittedly, I'd like to see him try to carry an episode himself. He's a fun concept and it'd be cool to see more of WordGirl fighting him directly, but he serves well as an antagonist for Two-Brains and fits alongside the rest of WordGirl's goofy themed roster. Aside from these two rival villains, there's not much to get into beyond maybe the canonization of villains being celebrities and exposition getting progressively more ludicrous.
Is this the police station?
No, it's the woods.
Dr. Two-Brains effectively being the real protagonist lends this episode a very unique feel and shows new sides to him to make him more endearing than ever before. He's definitely in my own personal top 5 WordGirl villains. Why is Mr. Bag hanging out in the Botsford's yard?
That indescribable feeling we get when the lights begin to dim.
On the night of a special Pretty Princess episode, WordGirl is forced to fight the energy monster.
Your rude behavior is truly shocking.
She eventually tricks the energy monster into burning too much energy and shrinking down so she can be trapped, but ends up missing the whole episode. She does learn, though, that there'll be a Pretty Princess movie premiering in a week. Pretty sure movie announcements don't work like that, but whatever. Becky, Violet, Bob, Tim, and TJ all head to the theater the night of the premiere, but the energy monster escapes because WordGirl apparently just left her in the store all week. And Huggy left the frozen yogurt machine running. Great work, guys. After we learn about refraction for some reason, Becky is forced to leave the theater to fight the energy monster again. Also, Scoops is now here. WordGirl realizes that the energy monster is scared of the refracted rainbow, so defeats her by plugging her into a spotlight, creating a rainbow, but not actually taking advantage of that fear at all. So the refraction thing really was just random. And so Becky and the others finally get to watch the movie. I don't have much specific to say about this episode. I mean, the energy monster's back, that's neat. She shows more sapience with her reactions to things like the security guard yelling at her, but that's about it. The cold open fight is oddly long, when usually these sorts of battles are no longer than a minute and don't have any cuts to other scenes. TJ being a not-so-closet fan of Pretty Princess works when he's yelling about the show, but not really when he's trying to deny it. Those parts are pretty repetitive and dull. The episode is overall pretty funny. There's some good jokes like Becky and Bob shaking their heads to the narrator, the usher in general, the aforementioned security guard, Scoops' interview, how excited everyone gets. Lil Mittens is apparently a movie star now. Yeah, there's just so little in terms of themes or noteworthy storytelling here outside of some weird pacing resulting from how the intro fight was handled. This episode is entertaining, but it's aggressively uninteresting, at least for the purposes of a video like this. It's a real shame because I do like how colorful the visuals can get with the rainbows and all the Pretty Princess branding.
Just as WordGirl did in the episodes High Fat Robbery, Coupon Madness, Two-Brain Highway.
Let me stop you there!
Oh no, Tommy is turning into me.
Where's Perry? Where is Perry? Wherefore art thou, Perry?
WordGirl and Huggy confront the butcher at an arcade where he's just stealing game tokens. He's beaten easily, but WordGirl offers to let him go if he just gives the tokens back.
I guess that's reasonable under the circumstances.
WordGirl does this because she needs to rehearse for a pet talent show, where the prize is apparently a year's supply of arcade tokens. Rehearsal doesn't go well though. After Huggy gets accidentally left behind, again, Bob gets so fed up with Becky and Tim's insulting ideas for the act that he straight up just runs away without them even noticing. Bob eventually ends up outside the Butcher's lair. While Butcher doesn't recognize him as Huggy, he does notice the resemblance and decides the monkey could be his ticket to winning the pet talent show, so he takes him in. While Butcher attempts to train Bob, which translates to Bob just eating a bunch of hot dogs, WordGirl approaches Dr. Two-Brains, Chuck, and Mr. Big to see if any of them have kidnapped Huggy. WordGirl eventually shows up at the Butcher's lair, and after making an impassioned speech, Butcher agrees to let WordGirl take Bob back to his owner, and the two make up. At the talent show, they do their ventriloquist act with a twist. This is the dumbest and/or most brilliant comedy act I've ever seen. Now here's an episode with a lot more going on. Season 1 and the shorts have kinda seeded the idea that WordGirl doesn't always treat Huggy the best, whether intentionally or not. She regularly makes him do humiliating things and leaves him behind on accident, failing to even apologize for that here, and this is where it hits a boiling point. You really feel bad for Bob, and it hits even harder when you take this in conjunction with his history. Bob isn't from Earth. He has nowhere to go aside from the Botsford, and since Becky is probably the only person he can even sort of relate to with regards to this, even though, as we'll eventually learn, Becky would have no memory of a time before Earth, her inadvertently pushing him away hits even harder. Thankfully though, this episode isn't just depressing. While I think WordGirl realizing how she made Bob feel could have been fleshed out more, it's clear she is genuinely sorry. The reunion is sweet, and Becky puts her money where her mouth is by taking Bob's suggestions for the act. The act itself is just one of the many funny moments in the episode, most of which actually come from the villain cameos. Seeing them in their off time really drives home how they treat villainy as just a regular job, and they can get up to some goofy stuff.
And bring the company crowbar, I seem to have tangled myself up again.
I think the weakest part of the episode would be Butcher's attempts to train Bob. The gradual escalation is good, and it's clear Bob just ignoring everything for more hot dogs is the point, but it's still slightly too repetitive for my taste, and it just doesn't have a lot of punch. I will say though, the Butcher being the one to take Bob in is interesting. The episode works just fine if you take it in isolation, but if you keep the whole Lil Mittens thing in mind...
Of course, WordGirl. You'll bring that pet back to the owner.
It reads a little differently, let's say. This episode is definitely worth more than just a shrug. Its emotional beats are decent, even if they don't get enough time, and it manages to be surprisingly funny while not hurting the tone too much. Although I do hope the leaving Huggy behind running gag completely dies after this. It's already not that funny anymore, but WordGirl really should just learn her lesson by this point.
Captain Huggy Face, show us what grimace means.
Becky and Violet are being dropped off at a nature camp for the weekend by Tim. I guess Violet's mom was too busy to drive her. Actually, come to think of it, we've only ever seen Violet's mom. Does she have another parent? Tobey is also being dropped off by his mom, who wants him to take a break from robots, but he smuggles in a tiny robot that quickly grows to normal size. Mrs. McAllister then comes back to yell at him more because he did this 10 seconds after she left. Warden Chalmers, who is apparently the one in charge, welcomes all the kids, but Tobey makes a ruckus by having his robot build an entire house for him. That sets the tone for the weekend, as Tobey continually uses his robot to replicate modern conveniences while everyone else struggles to do proper nature stuff. Obviously though, things eventually go wrong. Specifically, Tobey gets stuck in a tree while a thunderstorm causes his robot to go berserk. The campers work together to rescue Tobey from the tree, then Becky turns into WordGirl to quickly stop the robot. Everyone gets to continue their camping weekend in peace, except for Tobey, who's a bit behind the curve on the outdoors. I like how Season 2 is leaning more into Tobey doing more stuff at school, or in this case, just generally being with other kids. And putting someone obsessed with robots and technology in a nature setting is in itself a really effective premise. At the risk of sounding 30 years older than I really am, I think physical fitness and appreciation of nature are important facets of childhood that can easily be drowned out by excessive indulgence in technology. And this episode not only shows off why these things are important, but depicts the extremes of rejecting them in Tobey. He's extremely lazy, smug, and annoying to everyone else, and when the chips are down, he's reduced to a victim of his own poor planning. Building on that, I like how Becky declines to turn into WordGirl to save Tobey. Not to spite him or anything, but because she wants to have the campers use their wilderness skills to do it, directly attacking Tobey's philosophy. Outside of the theme and the unique, at least at this point in the show, nature setting, there's not much specific to say. There are some good jokes. Tobey's behavior is entertaining on top of everything else, and there's a running gag of a Sasquatch showing up and everyone treating it as normal. I also like Warden Chalmers here. Him being into nature and showing a softer side was a pleasant surprise after him seemingly just being a one-joke character. But the way it uses characterization to flesh out an interesting and important lesson is what really makes this episode endearing to me. As a kid, I admittedly didn't really follow this episode's example at all, but I appreciate the lesson a lot more with some perspective.
Is this being independent?
Yeah, this kid looks like Johnson, but I'm pretty sure he isn't supposed to be him. We already know Johnson's model was reused for a favorite word segment, so I'm guessing it wasn't until later they decided, hey, this fan club kid was neat, let's bring him back. So now we just have a fake Johnson running around. That's terrifying.
Oh, what, you gonna cry? You gonna cry now?
A new librarian named Milt is being shown around by library head Miss Dewey. Milt learns that one Becky Botsford has 37 books due before closing time, and relishes the chance to mark her overdue and confiscate her library card despite her apparent perfect record of returns. Out of everything Becky's done in the show, this is what impresses me the most. On the way to the library, Becky, Bob, and Tim stop to see Raoul Demiglass, a Gordon Ramsay knockoff known for making aspiring chefs cry. The butcher shows up to have Raoul try his own beef stew, but Raoul's refusal causes Butcher to trap him in pastrami until he tastes something. WordGirl eventually comes up with the idea of performing a taste test between the two's respective stews, enlisting Huggy to be the judge, but his eagerness causes him to knock everyone down. In the process, revealing that Raoul just makes canned stew and uses raw onions to make people cry. Because apparently no one ever noticed the conspicuous white flecks Raoul likes to fling onto people's faces. Raoul flees the scene, Butcher is arrested, and Becky just barely gets to the library in time to return her books, putting an end to Milt's smugness.
Oh, no, ma'am.
Not overdue!
With the most hilariously overdramatic cinematography in the show. This is a really weird episode. There's multiple scenes where we cut back to the library to see this weirdo Milt smugly ranting about how he's gonna mark Becky overdue, that this sort of thing is his life's purpose. That's only barely an exaggeration.
You know what makes me proud to be a librarian? Catching people like Becky Botsford when they turn in overdue books.
I'll admit, he's fun to watch with his voice acting and how ridiculous he acts, but it's odd to spend so much time on this random guy for the sake of a subplot that didn't really need to be a subplot. It only barely ties into the main story, and I don't think we lose that much if we just cut everything with Milt and Miss Dewey. Oh, I get it.
If it's just a card catalog, then how does it know your name?
But speaking of that main plot, it's slightly less weird. The butcher gets upset with the celebrity chef, kind of replicating the Mass Meat Marauder dynamic of him getting a one-off rival, and tries to force him to taste his dishes. It's less out of place here than it would be in other shows, but it doesn't feel like the episode is embracing how silly and small stakes it is. Part of me thinks they added the library subplot because they thought kids would find Raoul so annoying that they wouldn't feel much urgency to save him, so they needed a time crunch. The reveal of Raoul's duplicity is extremely obvious and isn't funny enough to make up for that. In fact, the butcher side of the story isn't really that funny overall. The stuff involving Tim and Becky is pretty good.
Is that Captain Huggy Face out there breaking into my car?
But the butcher, who's usually a really funny character, is just kinda nothing here. So we got an underplayed main plot that's just a little funny, and a mostly pointless subplot that's a little more funny. I think both of these stories would have worked better as their own episodes. One where Butcher hijacks Raoul's show or something, and another where WordGirl is forced to fight a bunch of villains back to back who are all in some way blocking her ride to the library. That'd probably be a pretty neat episode pair, actually.
Take a look at these 3 pictures and tell me which one shows the definition for Tiff. What's your answer, Phil?
Number 2.
Veruca Salt, the little brute, has just gone down the garbage chute.
Becky and her classmates are about to leave on a field trip for a candy factory ran by one Zachary Zaney. Their teacher, Mr. Dudley, has everyone buddy up with another student. Becky and Violet initially pick each other, but on the bus, Eileen demands to be Violet's buddy. Becky is thus forced to buddy up with Mr. Dudley instead. At the factory, they meet Zachary Zaney himself, who...
Imagination and whimsy?
If by that you mean precision and efficiency, then you're absolutely right.
Isn't what they expected. The tour progresses with Zachary quashing any notions of fun despite the kids' enthusiasm and the apparent existence of the Candy Imaginatrix, a machine that could produce any kind of candy you can imagine on its own. At the end of the tour, the kids are promised free samples, and Eileen demands to go first. Surprisingly, Eileen is understanding and just takes her sample quietly. Nah, she goes big, and WordGirl and Huggy put up a fight until coming up with an idea, baiting Eileen to the Candy Imaginatrix and tricking her into eating so much candy she gets sick. The factory is saved, Becky and Violet finally get to be buddies, even if only briefly, and Zachary Zaney gives out an extra treat.
Once we get back to the school, I'll divide this up so you can each have a sliver.
Yeah, the reason he's like this is because he had a bad run-in with some fish guy that made him really paranoid about giving people too much chocolate. This is a pretty obvious Charlie and the Chocolate Factory homage. I'm calling it that because that's what the original book was called. Also, I've never watched the 1971 movie, but I love the twist of Zachary Zaney being the cheapest and most boring guy ever. It ironically makes the episode feel more unique and engaging thanks to the irony compared to what you'd expect of a Candy Factory tour episode, and plays off the other characters pretty well. When I initially watched this episode to take notes on it, I found Eileen even more grating than Slumber Party Pooper, and was gonna make a point about her whole thing getting less enjoyable with each appearance. Going back over the episode while scriptwriting though, she actually wasn't that bad. It's still pretty much the same thing as SPP, Eileen's greed annoying everyone but forcing them to acquiesce to delay her inevitable transformation, but I think her contrasting with how deliberately dull Zachary Zaney is helps it here.
On the contrary, they're mine, and I have the paperwork to prove it.
I also noticed a few moments that indicated Eileen isn't necessarily as oblivious to the distress she causes people as one might think, showing smugness at getting what she wants or coldness towards the obvious distress Violet feels, but that's something we'll discuss later. I also like how WordGirl beats Eileen. As opposed to tricking her into being generous or wrapping her in a giant sleeping bag, here WordGirl takes advantage of Eileen's gluttony to make her too sick to rampage anymore. It's a pretty natural idea, and I'm surprised this is the first Eileen episode to do this. I'd normally say this episode would have been better served being more over the top, but that'd kinda defeat the point, wouldn't it? Oh, I forgot to mention this episode introduces Mr. Dudley, who gets a decent joke about hiding his own enthusiasm, but I know he gets replaced by a new teacher eventually, so I doubt he'll be that important. And Violet's cat Priscilla, who's a cat. Why is she even here?
Brother! It's been too long.
Chuck is upset to hear his brother, Brent the handsome, successful, everyone loves him sandwich making guy, is coming to town. Were he and Chuck given these names at birth? Chuck got a bit of a raw deal then. Becky, meanwhile, is having her own sibling troubles as TJ accidentally breaks one of her unicorn figures. That's the same one from the Manners episode, by the way. Poor thing also got a raw deal. Chuck finds himself unable to escape people who love Brent's greatest creation, crustless bread, sounds stupid to me, leading into a hilarious nightmare sequence.
Crustless bread! Crustless bread! Fill your head with crustless bread!
Chuck then runs into Brent, who tries and fails to bond with him, while TJ tries to apologize for breaking Becky's unicorn. Later, Chuck steals an award Brent was meant to earn, but WordGirl convinces him to give it back. Brent admits he's envious of Chuck's own lifestyle, and the two leave to hang out. TJ then gives Becky a replacement figurine, and the two bury their own hatchet. This is one of the few episodes to not involve any kind of crime whatsoever, being entirely focused on character development and smaller interpersonal conflicts. The episode splits its time between the Chuck-Brent arc and the Becky-TJ arc like they're trying to parallel each other or something, and both hit the emotional beats pretty well, though one is better written than the other. TJ's story doesn't get as much time devoted to it, understandable, it is just a subplot, but the basic structure of anger Becky, make it up to her, get forgiven is fine enough. One thing I do appreciate is that TJ actively works to make amends and Becky isn't forced to forgive him just for forgiveness' sake. While the conflict is compared to Chuck's comparatively petty grievances with Brent, Becky is never depicted as unreasonable for being angry.
Well, it never would have happened if you stayed out of my room like you're supposed to.
She's got you there, son.
But speaking of Chuck and Brent, that's comparatively the more interesting and complex storyline. Being jealous of a sibling, or anyone else close to you, is something a lot of kids can relate to, and I think the way it's handled with Chuck is really well done. His feelings are shown to be misplaced, but still treated with sympathy. He has to learn that he doesn't need to feel jealous of Brent, but isn't treated as a bad person for it. He learns his lesson, makes amends, and the two come to a better understanding of each other that brings them closer. I will admit this one line feels a bit off in a time where the concept of found family is becoming more prevalent in both fiction and real life.
Friends come and go, but a sibling is someone who will always be there for you.
But I think the overall message of be nice to your siblings and don't let jealousy get in the way of your bonds is a good one. This may not be the funniest episode, though there are some highlights, foremost the nightmare and Becky yelling a definition, and there are a few lines of dialogue that feel a little forced.
I just can't stop shoving this crustless bread in my mouth. It's the greatest thing ever.
You're behaving like a very envious sibling.
But this is clearly a very moral-focused episode, and it's a good moral that supports some very sweet moments.
Looks like all the siblings in this episode are finally getting along.
Please tell me there isn't a small army of people inventing a personality for Huggy's brother and clogging the WordGirl tag with him as a pseudo-OC. WordGirl and Huggy, fighting the energy monster, take her out by luring her to the water with a disco ball. Apparently she likes shimmering things. News to me. After arriving back at school, Becky learns that afternoon is auditions for a production of Romeo and Juliet, which gobsmacks Becky because it's her favorite play, but she somehow never knew about this until now. That afternoon, Becky and Scoops' auditions for the title characters don't go well, but Violet nails her Juliet audition, and the apparent frontrunner for Romeo is a British kid named Hunter Throbheart, who Violet and Becky both crush on. Oh, and speaking of British kids...
Next.
Some weird corner of my mind wants to see what chaos would result from Toby being Romeo. Come to think of it, I'm surprised he wasn't the episode's villain. The next day, is it normally this fast? I never did drama in school. Hunter and Violet get the starring roles, while Becky is named Violet's understudy. Scoops also gets a role, as a wall.
Thank you, or should I say...
As Becky tries to weasel her way into a bigger role, the energy monster emerges from the water. The night of the play, she's drawn to Violet's shiny Juliet hat and abducts her. Becky briefly struggles with the chance to play Juliet, but ultimately decides to help Violet, pulling the same tactics as the episode's start. Meanwhile, with no Juliet and Hunter suffering stage fright, I have so many questions about the rest of the cast, Scoops takes over and tells the story in his own way, which against all odds goes over really well. Becky, Violet, Scoops, and Bob then do this.
Good day, both Juliets.
Good day, Talking Wall.
I want to see that play now. Oh, and I guess this confirms Violet's mom is a single parent? This is a pretty predictable episode, and with some exceptions, it's unfortunately not entertaining enough to make up for that. Becky becomes the understudy, is tempted to leave Violet to her fate, but ultimately chooses to help her. It's sweet, but also kinda dull. I have mixed feelings on the presence of Hunter Throbheart. I get why he's here. It'd be odd to just ignore Romeo or have some background character play him, and we can't use Scoops because him being a wall is the best part of the episode.
And then Romeo says something like, "Oh, Juliet, you are so beautiful. I love you so much."
But he still gets an odd amount of focus for such a one-off character. I almost wonder if they planned on bringing him back eventually, but just forgot. Although I do like him succumbing to stage fright in a way that hurts his charming English kid image. Almost makes me wish Becky and or Violet got to see that. I'm also pretty lukewarm on the Energy Monster's appearance. As I joked earlier, they kinda just throw in her licking sparkly things as if it was already established, so it feels like they just made up something random and slapped it in. They could have at least shown her actually demonstrating this before WordGirl and Huggy lure her with the disco ball, make it look like the two were just learning this and quickly take advantage of it. But yeah, while this episode can be funny at times, the plot just doesn't really work that well. Maybe if we had more of the actual play, more scenes of rehearsing, maybe have the climax involve a villain nearly destroying the play for whatever reason, it would have felt more coherent and entertaining.
Disguise yourself as a fireman, a French spy.
This is not a trick.
A checkers competition is being held, with Becky as a participant and Tim as the referee.
The mayor said I could do it if I agreed to provide my own whistle and get out of his office.
Starting out strong, I see. Toby then shows up to enter his Checkmate 3000 robot, that's not checkers, with a flashback revealing he's traumatized or something from losing a game to Violet as a toddler. Somehow, I gotta think this is responsible for him being evil. Also, please give us some more substantive Violet-Toby interactions. Becky ends up losing the final match to the robot, but Toby's victory is rendered hollow by the revelation that everyone was instead watching Bob playing his own matches and beating anyone who challenges him. Toby and Becky volunteer their respective champions for a match the next day, and we then see the two's training styles contrasted.
Dramatic music, two competitors preparing for a showdown. I smell a montage.
Because we just haven't had enough of those, have we? In all seriousness though, this may be the best montage of this episode batch, with some really good editing and comedic visuals. During the match, Toby snaps at the Checkmate 3000, causing it to go on a rampage and just delete anything checkered from existence. WordGirl and Huggy stop the robot, but make Toby promise to be less hard on it instead of destroying it. And thus Bob is named Checkers Champion. Okay, the best part of this episode is Tim, who gets up to a lot of shenanigans as an aspiring checkers referee. He gets his own bits in the training montage, and maybe the funniest moment in the episode is this.
12 o'clock.
Can we make it noon? I know better than to cross the CRU.
Huh?
Checkers Referee Union.
This episode also reminds me of the car wash and scavenger hunt episodes from last season and how everyone takes such a simple game ridiculously seriously. I suppose the bingo episode could fit this description too, but we know how that went. This is embodied in the news reporters who keep cropping up.
It's like a much more challenging combination of chess, triathlon, and brain surgery.
But the heart of this episode would be the divide between Becky and Toby's attitudes and methods of training. Becky reins herself in after getting carried away and doesn't try to pressure Bob into gunning for a win, while Toby
Nothing is more important than vanquishing this pretender to our checkers throne. Nothing!
does the opposite. WordGirl actually sympathizing with the Checkmate 3000 and getting Toby to apologize instead of destroying it is an interesting twist, although it does raise questions about how likely it is for these things to become sentient, especially after Artsy. The robot acting out by destroying anything that reminds it of checkers works as a premise for the final fight, but also manages to downplay the consequences enough that it's not like WordGirl is forgiving something that just knocked down a building. This is probably my favorite competition episode thus far. It takes a different route with this antagonist, it's really funny, and it has some of the best visuals in the show. And having Bob be the effective main protagonist, even if Becky is more relevant to the theme, is the cherry on top.
Take a look at these 3 pictures and tell me which one shows the definition for disguise. Give it a shot, Tommy!
Number 2.
Monkey law and monkey order.
There's something magical about a 2-part episode. Taking a story and making it take up twice as much time inherently makes it seem bigger and more impressive. This effect has become diluted a bit as shows focus more on ongoing stories and use 2-parters more often. Some shows even do it for their first episode, but I will always remember seeing this episode for the first time and seeing those magical words Part 1 on the title card, something I'd never seen from this show before. At a newly opened Pretty Princess store, Reginald is displaying a set of priceless jeweled figurines based on the show, until a figure off screen shows up and steals them as Reginald faints. Ugh, that voice. Can we go back to the checkers playing robot? Becky and Violet arrive at the store only to see the police investigating the crime scene and taking care of a traumatized Reginald. And I'm not exaggerating this time, listen to this.
That voice! That awful voice! It haunts me!
Becky sneaks in closer and finds one of the figurines was left behind. Because she's an idiot or an immature 10-year-old, she takes it to investigate on her own instead of going WordGirl and handing it off. Later that night, WordGirl is contacted by Police Commissioner Watson and gives him the prime suspect, Eileen, the birthday girl. WordGirl helps with a friggin' police raid on Eileen's house, but she puts up a sweet act that convinces the police she's not the culprit. Watson then realizes there's someone else in the house that fits the thief's profile. He has WordGirl and Huggy turn out their pockets. This does not go well.
All I have in my pockets is this evidence. What? Oh, you think I...
WordGirl argues her case, but to no avail.
No.
This face. It alone makes me question everything I knew about this character. More on that later. WordGirl is arrested, and a shocked Huggy is left alone at the house. After a recap of 2 minutes ago, part 2 opens with WordGirl in jail, with only Chalmers and Amazing Rope Guy for company, while all the other villains are running rampant in her absence. WordGirl is then put on trial, with her own mother acting as prosecutor. Reginald's testimony and Sally's interrogation don't help WordGirl's case, but she turns things around by calling Eileen to the stand, why is she here, and goading her into transforming.
I won't let you take it!
Then you'll have to come with me too!
At this rate, I guarantee the next Eileen episode involves her kidnapping Tim somehow. Eileen marches through the city, intimidating even the other villains, but when WordGirl says Sally is another kid's mommy, Eileen chooses to give her back, in the process undoing her transformation. After a sweet little moment with Sally, WordGirl is declared innocent, and she arrests all the other villains. In seconds, because apparently not having a speaking role makes you 10 times weaker. As you'd expect, this one has a different structure from every episode thus far, and it's also given a somewhat distinct tone. We've had more dire-feeling episodes in the past, we've had episodes where everyone turns on WordGirl, but this one cranks those aspects up more than ever before. Our hero is in jail, she's forced to defend herself against her ferocious DA mother, and the city has fallen into chaos while all this happens. The extensive use of sunset and nighttime scenes in part 1 helps this, as does some neat artwork like good use of shadows, light, and Dutch angles. Part 2's tone isn't as intense, but it works well as the payoff of what part 1 set up. Another way part 1 worked so well as setup was the pacing. It's not really a mystery since we know who it is and it's pretty obvious what's going to happen, but there's a building sense of tension throughout that hits a boiling point when WordGirl is caught with the figurine. And part 2 didn't squander this potential either. We start off with some more humorous bits of WordGirl in jail and Huggy trying in vain to fight the villains, but the trial scene ratchets the tension back up, largely thanks to Sally. The trial is also paced really well itself, with the 3 witnesses almost giving it a sort of mini 3-act structure. I also think the voice actors, in general, did a really good job here. Wayne Knight's Commissioner Watson did a really good job balancing mildly hapless behavior with a dead serious demeanor, and H. John Benjamin injected more emotion into Reginald than I ever thought possible.
I see. You want me to just drop what I'm doing and explain everything.
I'm the monster! Oh no!
Dana Furman's WordGirl, Maria Bamford's Sally, and Pamela Adlin's Eileen are also really good, but mostly just build on what we've seen of them before. Speaking of Eileen, I was surprised they chose to make her the villain of a 2-parter, let alone one with a premise like this, but it works surprisingly well. I love the implication that she is knowingly framing WordGirl and taking pleasure in it, as shown with that one smirk. It honestly raises the question of if she's just greedy and immature, or she actually enjoys doing bad things as much as other villains. But as we learn, she does have her limits. You know how Eileen always talks about her mom, how she's apparently the reason Eileen thinks every day is her birthday? Well, turns out that affection is actually a way to tap into however much empathy Eileen has, as someone else's mother is the one thing she'll refuse to steal. It's a surprisingly sweet moment that fleshes out both Eileen and her perpetually off-screen mother. It also gives the climax a unique feel against other episodes, which are either more action-oriented or played for comedy. Also helping the climax is all the cameos from other villains. Not only does it follow through on what we saw earlier, but Eileen scaring everyone and just bodying Toby's robot really helps her feel like more of a threat. All in all, this was a really strong first two-parter. I do actually think it leaned slightly too hard into the tension, but it still had a good supply of jokes.
You are a little girl, little with an L sound. See how I'm doing that? Little, not whittle, little.
WordGirl canonically hates OWO speak, and the unique mood worked really well for it. I don't want a lot of episodes to be like this, but it provides a really good model for when they want to make a story more of an event. Okay, seriously, Becky, why didn't you just turn into WordGirl at the crime scene? There's no way the cops would have turned you away if you were able to participate in a police raid. They would have actually listened to you, and you could have handed over the figurine before temptation set in. Why didn't you just... I couldn't help but notice a lot of recurring themes and motifs in this set of episodes. People turning against WordGirl is the biggest one, already compared most of those to each other. I'd say Wrong Side of the Law is a very close second to I Think I'm a Clone Now in both how this was handled and overall episode quality. Sally's job as district attorney got fleshed out more. As I joked earlier, it seemed like they were deliberately building up to Wrong Side of the Law. The school cropped up quite a bit, but this really wouldn't be notable at all if it weren't for school not factoring into season 1 at all, which is still a bit odd. There was also a lot more of WordGirl being tempted to prioritize her own desires over the good of the city, some examples being more prevalent than others. None of these are really big deals individually, but they stick out because season 1 didn't really have any major recurring story beats like these. It feels like Soup Two Nuts had a few specific ideas they really liked here and wanted to keep using, which is overall fine. Most of these were at least passable. I just hope none of these become recurring enough to get samey. People mistrusting WordGirl in particular, I think could have done with spacing them out a bit more. Do we really need 2 of those episodes back to back? And could we maybe get fewer montages next time? Next time on...
Sorry, busy right now.
Your bill is now $1 million!
Whammer worked all day on this resume.
I am a robot controlled by the evil boy villain Toby.
I'm just an old man with a potato on his chest.
I am your local authority on vocabulary.
Show host strength.
This ray turns hair gel into cream cheese.